Hi Trey.
Good
Yes.
morning.
Oh, good evening.
How's it going?
Okay, going good. I mean, I get to talk to you again, which is cool.
Yep.
Okay. There's this strange psychological phenomenon. Like whenever I have a full day, right? It and I can see it like in my calendar, like tomorrow's gonna be a full day, and then it's really stressful for me to see that. But then when I actually look at the people I'm talking to, or
It's not so bad.
it's not so bad, right?
Yeah. I feel pretty dirty. Today I have a really full day and I'm like, you got nothing to complain about, man. For me, it's more like especially Fridays, like it's kind of dorky, but I like I go grocery shopping and clean the house inside of everything else. So it's kind of like, okay, I'm gonna vacuum the rug. Okay, back to the laptop. Okay, now I got to change the bed. Okay, I'm gonna go over there and so everything's kind of funny on a Friday.
Yeah, yeah. So I I don't really remember where we stopped last time, um, but I guess you sort of like have an idea. Um, well, I have an idea. I think it would be great to even go back like to before guitarcraft, right? That would
Yeah,
be awesome.
yeah,
And then there's also like the part with like the joy of molybdenum, like in your solo career, and also the uh, recording, like the repercussions of angelic behavior. We talked about that, not, I think,
not
but
much.
but anyway, like some of those
Yeah,
things would
yeah,
be interesting, I think. But
yeah,
so so tell me, or tell me about your childhood.
yeah. Great.
Yeah.
um, so I don't know. I can't. I mean, I can kind of remember my first inclination towards playing music. It was like from hearing somebody play piano. I was really young, like
Hmm.
six, maybe a violin, or we used to listen to music, and some of my earliest musical memories were uh, actually the New World Symphony, like really young, like three or something.
Hmm.
And nobody in my family played music except for my grandfather. My mother's father played lots of country, like old country, Hank Williams country, and uh, 60s and 50s country, and he played the harmonica and the guitar, and that's I guess that's where it started. So I wanted to play piano.
Hmm.
My parents kind of conceded that, or they wanted to do it, but it was like they didn't even know how to do it. What you got to if you want to play piano, you have to get a piano, right?
Hmm.
There was
Hmm.
nothing electric back then. Um, so that's kind of where it started, and then I started studying, and of course, you had to study classical piano. So and I guess
So you
right,
started taking lesson at that age, or?
yeah, seven, maybe six or seven, something like that.
Hmm.
And just doing it was kind of it was cool, and it was also a little strange because you just at that age you just do whatever you're told to do, kind of. I mean,
Hmm.
and then you play or you dink around, but you're kind of. I wouldn't. I can't. I don't think I got very exploratory for a few years. Like at first, it's just like there's this giant thing, and okay, you do this,
Hmm.
and I guess probably I'm going to ask you in another session, but it's probably similar. Like we were pretty lucky to have been born where we were because, uh, like, I got exposed to Bach early on, but also the microcosmos. We played through not the whole microcosmos, but
Hmm.
a lot of it, and it's pretty out there for a kid.
Hmm. Yeah.
Nothing that Bach and little Beethoven sonatinas and Mozart sonatinas. That's stuff that you would counter in the world, but Bartok, maybe now because of television and film music, but in the '60s, you didn't come across major and minor tonality at the same time.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I'm like, wow, This is
Mm-hmm.
freaky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that went on for a few years. And then I got interested in the
So
violin.
what do you remember about the teacher?
Almost nothing. I had a couple of different teachers, and I don't even know where they came from or why they went away and another one came.
Mm-hmm.
There was a youngish teacher, probably um, in her 20s, who lived like across the street from one of my schools. So I would leave, with my little book of Mozart and Microcosmos and walk over there. And I don't even remember. I don't remember doing anything. I don't remember practicing. I remember the music,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't remember. You know, I don't remember much interaction with the teacher. And then I had an older woman for a while, and then I do the thing that I do remember most. Actually, I found recently. I used to go to these little competitions. I don't know how that happened. I think the teacher would get us to do like these. There would be maybe it was a traveling thing. I don't know. There would be like these little piano competitions, and you'd go and play your pieces. And I found my scorecards from like when I was in third and fourth grade, and the pieces that I played, and it's quite a lot of pieces. And I can remember after that, I would go. Um, I would have to miss a little bit of school, so everybody was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" I was like, "Going to piano contest." I'm like, "Whoa, what's that?" But I do remember becoming more, because we listened to a lot of like pop music at the time. So this would have been mid 60s. So it was like Simon and Garfunkel and Cat Stevens and all this stuff. And I got really interested in that. And I remember getting my mom to buy me like a book of pop arrangements, like the big note pop arrangements. And I was really into some really stupid pop songs. And I wanted, but I was afraid to say anything to my teacher about them because it was so obviously like a different world, right? And so my mom said something to her,
Mm-hmm.
and so she said, "Well, okay, we'll bring in one of the pieces." So I brought in a great embarrassing moment for her, and I didn't know enough to be embarrassed. I brought in um, "Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head." Do you know that
Mm-hmm.
song?
Yeah.
And so I got it. She was like, "Okay," and I got it out and I played it for her, and she really made a pretty strong effort to figure out how to help me play it better
Mm-hmm.
for about like 37 seconds. And then she couldn't come up with anything. And we both kind of quietly just pretended that it didn't happen. And we closed that book and got out the Bach book and just pretended that it never happened. And kind of, at that point, I think I was kind of being taught like these worlds don't meet. Like you're gonna, if you want to do that, you go over here and do that. And now you're gonna go and you kind of learn that there's a separation,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, which of course now doesn't exist at all. And that was kind of, I suppose that was the battle of a lot of my musical life for many years. Uh,
I, you
this
know,
whole
I,
this whole rock thing, and I mean it wasn't even rock yet. It was pop.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, but the separation that doesn't really exist in reality. It just exists in people who,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
in this case, teach, right?
yeah.
Like in a podcast that I just released, I said something pretty offensive about classical musicians. I said they can't play.
Mm.
Obviously, obviously, I guess that's not a general statement, but um, it's interesting that sort of it seems to be like, I don't know, like I only, ever since I'm on this planet, right, people seem to really need to belong to a certain group or a
Mm.
certain belief. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be religion, right? It can be something like classical music, or like I only know what I know and I don't want to know anything else. And this is It's interesting. I because like I can't remember if that really happened to me in the same way. I think it didn't. I sort of maybe I
The
sort of
world, the
assumed.
world,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the world was is was changing,
Hmm.
because like going further, and I don't want to skip over my teenage years because there's some awesome shit in there, but like going into college, like I studied music in college, I have a
Hmm.
degree in college,
Hmm.
uh, and so I've been through that world, and I went through that world when it was pretty much kind of, it was changing, but it was still the old world, which was, um, we would let jazz guitar, like you could get one credit. We give it a little nod. Classical guitar, we would give it more of a nod, but there's just not enough of you guys around it. You can't make a living as classical guitarists anyway. And, you know, there's a few really good ones, but that was it, And so for me, and we both still see it, obviously, because we're talking about it. To me, I don't know if it just comes from academia, but yeah, you can't really be a classical musician without studying like a motherfucker. You, I think, certainly to be accepted in the profession
Yeah.
and play stylistically correctly. But for me, it's all about judgment. It's all about being in the hierarchy, and uh, I'm above you. That's pretty much what it is.
Probably,
The
yeah.
bad side, because even when I went into college, early 80s, um, world music was just having such a battle to be accepted. I mean, there wasn't even quite world music, but like there was, depending on where you wanted to study, like you had to kind of prove the legitimacy of all these kinds of music to have them be culturally valid. Of course, there's cultures where part of the culture that's not, it's the exact opposite. Like classical musicians, I mean, you can't say that they're not great players, and you can't say that the music is, some of it's not amazing, but you could also say it's like, it's like court music from the 17th century. Like, what the fuck, right?
You know, I think there's something about um, concrete versus abstract that kind of like lives in those worlds, like where the classical music is very concrete, right? You would practice your technique learning the pieces, right? So it's something, so you're building on a foundation of concrete knowledge or traditional knowledge, you could say,
Right.
right?
It's tested.
Tested, exactly. And so that may kind of like create a completely different mindset. And then if you take pop music like Raindrops, right? Like there, which
Yeah,
is a nice song, it even has some cool changes in it, right?
yeah,
So but there it's more abstract. You sort of have to come up with your own emotional interpretation of what you're supposed to think about it, right?
yeah,
Where with
yeah.
the classical music, even that seems to be almost like
It's already there.
pre-selected. Yeah, it's already there, exactly. and
Yeah,
and I think that's what it really was, that clash,
yeah.
right?
And also, this has changed now because classical musicians didn't, um, for the most part, didn't write music or improvise, and
Mm-hmm.
now that's changed. So it was a world of um, you're putting this thing onto you as opposed to what can I make, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and that's the pop thing, so that was a funny lesson, and I think it was uh,
Hey, what do you think in terms of like your um how aware, self-aware and aware of the world were you at that age? I mean, were you able to really kind of like, did that conflict that you encountered there, did that actually process as something like, I think you already answered the question, but did that process as something that really changed you? Do you think
Uh,
that did you register the importance of that?
oh, I definitely did. I mean, I got the message, which is you only say or show certain things to certain people. That's the message.
Okay.
This,
It's kind of
you know,
sad, right? At that age.
pretty sad. Yeah, pretty sad. But like we only have this kind of we only talk about this kind of thing with this person,
Yeah, yeah,
and this
sure.
person, this thing is okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
um, you know, uh, I really don't think the world is quite like that anymore.
Hmm.
At least it's so mixed up. It felt so radical at the time when I was in university to be playing in a punk rock band and studying Stravinsky. Now, who gives a shit? Like, yeah, everybody should be doing that, right? Yeah, yeah.
So then there was violin, you said.
So I played violin for a little bit. I was not very good. I wasn't that into it. I think what it was for me was I just loved the sound of the string, the bowed instrument,
Hmm.
and I thought, yeah, I want to do that. So for like I played piano for like 5 years, and then I played the violin. And this poor guy, there was a guy from this, we had where I lived in San Antonio. It was a pretty in Texas. It's not so now, but at the time, it was pretty isolated from the world, and there wasn't a music scene. Even when I was up through high school, you couldn't play in bars if you played your own music. Nobody wanted to hear that. So it
Hmm.
was a pretty desolate landscape. But we had a symphony, and my mom found this older gentleman. Who old? He seemed like he was about 90, but he's probably like my age now. And he like agreed to take me on. We kind of did a little audition or something weirdly, even though I couldn't play the violin, or I don't know. He just wanted to know if I could read music,
Hmm.
which I could do okay. And then he kind of taught me. And the thing is, he never showed me how to tune the violin, so I never tuned it. And one time I can remember I hadn't even practiced for like a week or two, and I saw him, and I got out the violin, or he picked up my violin, and he was so distraught and disgusted with how out of tune my violin was. Like it was like one of the notes was like a whole step off or something. And I was like, I didn't even know what to say, like he was pissed. He was that kind of disgusted, like, I don't know. I picture him. I don't even know if he was American, but I picture like Yasha Heifetz yelling at you or something, and I was like, I don't even know if I could express to him that I didn't even know how to tune it. He never showed me. I didn't know what the notes were. I just knew, like, if it was in tune, here are the notes. Anyway, it sounded horrible. It was. I think even that was tough for my parents. And then I kind of let that go. And then I don't know if I studied piano again after that. Maybe for a couple of years. Um, but then that's when I got an electric bass, and everything changed.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but the keyboard being your first instrument must still be sort of like, still, I don't know, but still be present in
Yeah,
how you visualize
yeah,
pictures, right?
it is. It is. Yeah,
Yeah, it's very
yeah.
hard to
And
get
it's,
rid of.
yeah, and it's funny. I kind of have gone. I mean, there were many years I didn't touch, decades I didn't touch a keyboard, but now I have a piano, as you know, and I don't play it a lot, but I still think, I still see it and I think it, and I go back and forth about trying to not see it and see it, and
Yeah.
but I know it pretty well. And I'm not a great sight reader, but I'm okay. I'm a better sight reader than I am a player. So like, one of the things I really actually enjoying is just sight reading, or just playing through old classical pieces and not even trying to get all the notes, just seeing what's in there.
Yeah, yeah.
Like Chopin, I love playing Chopin, but there's no way I can play all that. So I just get what I can and find the chords and snoop around.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Piano's really great. I mean, it's kind of the opposite of our instrument. Not total opposite, but the piano always sounds good when you play it, right? You
Mhm.
always get a good note. And there's only one middle C, which is so refreshing from our instruments. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So the electric bass,
yeah, yeah.
how did that come about? And
It came about, yeah, it came
how
about
old were you? How old were you?
um, probably 14, something like
Hmm.
that. I know I couldn't drive. Basically, there were some friends. I had some friends at school who had a band. They were putting a band together, right? For at the time, it sounded so serious, but of course, they were just fucking 14-year-olds wanting to make a lot of noise. And I was kind of interested in the guitar. Um, I can't remember if I had an acoustic guitar or not already. But anyway, I would play people's guitars when I would see them and stuff. And there was like a drummer and two guitar players, and they were like, what we really need is a bass player. And I was like, I want to be the bass player. um, so I got my folks to get me a Fender. It was like a three-quarter size. I don't know if it was a Mustang or a Music Master or something, three-quarter style bass. And we started playing, and it was just instant awesomeness. I mean, guitar is pretty cool, but man, plugging in the bass and the drums, and so we played. It seems like we played a lot, and we got quite good pretty quickly. I was really lucky to have the drummer that I played with. His name's John Keating. Really talented guy, and I was really lucky. And I many times I've looked back and said, "Man, I'm so glad that I played with somebody who had such a great feel and such a great time so early on," because it just makes you just take that impression, right? And the thing that was so awesome about the thing that was so awesome about the whole, and we ended up forming a band here. I'll tell you that in a second. But the thing that was so awesome about the way we played was that it was totally playful. So John and I had this rapport as the bass and drums as well. We didn't really give a shit what the guitar players were doing at all. I mean, we were just going to do our thing and you guys can survive. But John and I had this rapport of he's going to do some weird fill to throw me off and I'm going to do some weird shit to throw him off. And that was the core. That was is the complete opposite of what you kind of want your rhythm section to be. And that's what we did. We had this dueling like battle underneath all the music that we played. We'd be playing like Beatles songs or Rolling Stones songs, or we played a lot of Jeff Beck. And I mean, we just explored everything. And there was a lot of funk at the time. So we played a lot of funk, even though we were skinny little white guys. And John and I were always trying to throw each other off. And it was so awesome. It was so awesome. And one of the things, I'll just tell you one little story. My poor mother used to suffer us because I would tell the guys that they could come over and rehearse at my house, but I wouldn't tell her until like late Friday night that they were coming over on Saturday. And we would just play for like 6 hours straight, 7, 8 hours. And we would play, we actually, one of the first pieces we played was like this funk tune that we wrote called Preservation. And then we kind of learned the guitar players were quite good. And I'm in touch with two of the guys still, really musical, really into um, Beatles, but also like Alice Cooper and Mott the Hoople and really interesting, more unusual stuff. And we would we would fight with each other, and we would play and just get ourselves so wound up that somebody would just jump on somebody, and then we would start wrestling, and then we would get back and play. And I can remember one time the four of us, like we were just making such pandemonium, and like somebody jumped on somebody, and then the four of us like literally rumbled out the room, down the stairs into the yard, and we're just rumbling. And it's just what we did. I don't really understand. It was just like so much
So much energy.
so much of that energy, the
Yeah.
music, so much energy, and it's loud. And
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So we had a band called Regent, King Lords of Rock and Roll. And we played cover tunes and some originals, but not so much. Yeah. And we were
Hmm.
all over the map. We didn't even care. There was no singular vision at all. It was just like, let's do this song. Let's do this song. Let's play Jeff Beck. Let's play, I don't know, Stevie Wonder, whatever. Yeah.
And that went on for like a couple of years, or was that
Yeah. A couple of years. It's kind of, yeah, then some of us started to get a little more serious. We could never get John that serious. There was this, I don't know what it's like to be a young musician anymore, but the idea of making it just doesn't seem to exist at all anymore. I don't know if young people think, oh, let's make it, but at the time there was like there was this possibility of make it, right?
Mhm.
And we could never get the drummer on board for that. John he just didn't want to be a professional musician at all, the drummer. And so there was always this struggle with, could we get John to come to a gig? And we had another project. I started when kind of the new wave scene came in, early punk rock. I had a band with some of the same guys, called Quue, and we were doing more like Police and Joe Jackson and Iggy Pop and Blondie and stuff like that. And we were always trying to get John to be our drummer, and um, he just didn't want to. He just didn't want to do it. Yeah, yeah.
So how was the relationship with your family at that point?
Pretty rough.
Yeah.
I mean, in a certain way, they were pretty supportive, but there was this just obsession with the music. I mean, I was quite a good student in school, but I think it just they didn't really understand, and I these blinders would just go on, I think, in terms of playing music, and that probably drove them crazy, or maybe thought there was something wrong with me. I don't really know. Yeah.
And
I can tell you. Let me tell you one story about having the blinders on, because this came up when I
yeah.
was talking to Julia last week. We uh, so at one point, my same buddy John, and then this other guitar player Chris, who's one of the few guys I grew up with who's still a working musician and
Hmm.
has a studio in Texas. We signed up to, and we weren't even out of high school. We were maybe 17, but I know we could drive. We signed up to be in this battle of the bands. And in South Texas, it was just a real hard rock scene. So there was like uh, Rush and Thin Lizzy, and we didn't have like, when I talk to people who grew up on the East Coast, like this was a kind of a totally different kind of music. They were listening to Genesis and all these kind of European bands, and we were like, I don't know, into this Black Sabbath and like heavy dark rock. And so we signed up for this battle of the bands, and that was in this giant kind of warehouse place. And when we got there, we knew we didn't have the kind of gear to compete with like the older, bigger musicians. So we went and rented this little PA, stupidest PA. I don't even know what it was. It was like um, this weird nine little speakers in like kind of a hexagram shape, that these little, like like you'd have for a wedding reception or something. And that was the PA that we had. And I had a bass amp, and Chris had a guitar amp. John had drums, no mics. And we showed up at the Battle of the Bands, and it was this giant warehouse where there wasn't a singular stage. They just had all the bands set up in a giant circle. And we got there with our little amps, and these guys had like triple Marshall stacks, huge PAs, double kick drums with mics on all the kick drums. A couple of the bands even had brought in like lighting rigs, and we didn't have a sound man. We all we had was like one microphone, our little things, and we're like, holy shit. But we knew we were good. but we're like, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna do? We're shit, So we're like, okay. So we started calling people to see if we could borrow some guitar amps or other amps. So we found somebody who would lend me a bass amp. So then I would have like two little bass amps. And then we couldn't find a guitar amp for Chris. And we tried to call our buddy Andy, who had played with us sometimes, because he had one of those. I can't remember what it was. He had a Yamaha amp. And we're like, maybe we can borrow Andy's amp. And then Andy didn't answer. And we thought, maybe let's go to his house. Maybe he's there or something. We went to his house and there was nobody there. We knew they were out of town or something. And so we broke into Andy's house and borrowed his amp. And I think the back door was open. We went in and we saw in the kitchen, like the amp, he had like a little poodle or something. The amp was set in the doorway of the kitchen to keep the poodle from escaping to the rest of the house. So we thought, oh, we're just going to borrow the amp. We'll bring it back right after the battle ends. We pulled the amp out. We moved the couch so that it would block the dog from escaping. And then we borrowed the amp. We went and played the Battle of the Bands. People said we were good. We didn't win. We didn't have like lights and fire and explosions and all that. And then we're loading out and John runs over and says, oh man, you guys are in so much trouble. We're like, what? He's like, Andy was at the coast and he came back and they called the FBI and they fingerprinted the whole house and they're looking for the burglars. And we're like, holy shit, what do we do? He's like, you got to take the amp back. And John had told him that we took it. And I was like, John, what the hell's wrong with you? So Chris and I took the amp back. Andy was really mad at us. And I thought at the time, I was like, man, don't you get it? Like, Battle of the Bands, man. Your amp's fine. And his dad was really pissed. And I thought, man, we're going to go to jail or I don't know what. So his dad made Chris and I come to a meeting at his office the next morning. And I thought, I didn't really think it through at all. I should have thought, if he's having us come to his office, he's not going to turn us into the police or anything. Anyway, we got to the office and his dad, wanted to explain to us how bad of a thing this was and all that. And I was like, but it was the battle. It's the Battle of the Bands. Like, what are we supposed to do? You should have seen the other amps. And I'm trying to explain to him. And eventually Chris, and I even said, like, didn't you notice how the amp had been blocking the doorway? And then we moved the couch to protect the dog. And the amp is fine and everything. And Chris started kicking me under the table. It's like, dude. And I just could not let it go. I would just had to explain to this guy why we had no choice. We had to take the amp. So I think that, I don't know, that kind of obsession.
explains how serious a musician you are.
Yeah. And the single-mindedness to the point of being completely blind,
Fantastic. And so that was even before high school, right? You said
that was in high school.
That was it. That was in high. Okay. And
at that point, I realized I really wanted to learn about what I learn about music, like really learn. Like it was kind of against the grain because we were in this kind of whole punk rock scene at this point, and that is about not knowing, right? Like at the time, it was this kind of joyful, explosive, angsty ignorance. Like, I'm not going to learn what I'm doing, and I thought that was pretty stupid. Like, you could still do that, but the thing that I remember telling myself is, if you wanted to be a writer, you would want to learn about grammar. That doesn't make sense not to. So I really wanted to study more, and I couldn't figure out like how to go to college or like I was kind of isolated down in Texas, but it turned out there was a guitar school that was just opening up there run by this jazz guitarist, Jackie King, who super over the top jazz guitarist who ended up playing with Willie Nelson for 20 years, this Texas swing thing. So I stayed in Texas and studied at that school for a year. And that was pretty wild because I didn't really know jazz or like it. And I had never met anybody who did. But Jackie he kind of pitched this overall approach to guitar, jazz, classical, rock, studio. He'd been a studio musician for years and years. And I was like, man, right in my backyard, I gotta check it out. And so I went there, and it was a kind of a year-long conservatory kind of a part halftime kind of a thing. And man, I met these guys who were my age who just loved jazz, and they could play these jazz standards. And I was just amazed, like, where did you come from? And like, you live in Texas too, and where did you come across this music, and what would occur? What made you want to play Stella by Starlight while I'm playing Iggy Pop? Like, how did, I still don't even quite understand it, actually, how, as a young person, but I guess the craftsmanship and the whatnot. And so I worked in this really small school for a while and was exposed to a lot of music. And Jackie had ridiculous ears. His ears were so beyond that he almost couldn't even transmit it to us. Just the hard, deep jazz, like hard bop, serious bebop and reharmonization. And so I got exposed to a lot of stuff. And then after that, I was kind of a quirk there. I did okay. I found some of my papers, it was pretty harsh. Like, I got some C's and stuff, but we did some cool stuff. He got us writing music, which was really cool, which was, that never happened in the classical world, right? But there he would have you writing exercises and reharmonizing and arranging like a little Bach fugue for the guitar and stuff like that. Yeah.
Did you at that point already kind of like study 4-part harmony or something, or did that come later?
No, not in the traditional way. Not like species counterpoint. You mean like that kind of thing? Yeah, no, we didn't really do that. He was more. I mean, he kind of maybe gave a nod to it a little bit, but it was more. It was more practical. If you want to be like, if you wanted to be, and a couple of the guys that were in the school there, like, went to Las Vegas or went on, worked on a cruise ship. It was more. It was really more of a what do you call it? Like a technical school kind of thing. Which in that sense, it was really, really cool. In another sense, some of it just went so far over my head and wasn't the vocabulary for me. And it was also, I learned an intellectual approach to jazz improvisation, which I can still access, but it's not real. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's theoretical.
I do know what you mean.
Yeah. And I don't think that's necessarily a fault of Jackie or the school. It's just kind of how it was presented and how I received it,
Yeah, and it's still presented like that by most teachers.
Yeah. And the vocabulary is so foreign to me. That's kind of the only way I could get it, was intellectually.
So I guess what you're saying is that you really weren't exposed to much jazz as a kid. The other kids you met, probably had their parents listen to jazz, and that's how they. Yeah.
I mean, Texas swing to a degree, but that's a different thing. It's like you have the notes and the structure of the music, and then you have the kind of thing that you pour into it. The thing that you pour into Texas swing is very different than jazz standards. And pour into jazz standards. I can appreciate it now, but more as a craftsman than I really love the music. Yeah.
Okay, but then you figured out how to get into college.
Yeah. Then I decided I really wanted to know more, and I needed to leave Texas. I needed to leave
Hmm.
Texas. So
Hmm.
that's when I moved up to Oregon, and I went to school in Oregon, and it wasn't my total plan to stay up there. I really wanted to go to California. Um, but the schools that I went to California, they were just kind of cold and not so inviting. And I really wanted to study electronic music. And there was like a 2-year waiting list. And when I went up to Oregon, there was a giant Moog 3 sitting in this room, just vacant, and nobody was touching it. And I could get right in there, like right in the beginning. So I was like, I got to go up there and do that. So that's kind of where I got exposed to just all sorts of, just being out of Texas on the coast, different universe. Oregon's just an amazing place, and the school there was not super rigorous academy, so I was able to, if you had gone to Juilliard or Oberlin or something, they would have just beat you with 4-part harmony and ear training, and you wouldn't been able to do anything but that. But I was able to kind of be in some punk rock bands and have bands kind of at the same time. And I worked in a little studio there on and off, and I ended up studying composition because I didn't want to study performance. That didn't make any sense to me. I was never going to play that well classical music, and it seemed like a uh, waste of time. So I studied composition, which was great, and also a little bit like studying jazz too. It was so, yeah, you'll get a kick out of this. Maybe we talked about this before, I don't know, but I remember the I you don't get into the composition program for like a year or two, and then you get assigned a teacher, and it's a one-to-one thing. And when I first had my first meeting with my first teacher that summer, I had just discovered Steve Reich and Philip Glass and music for 18 musicians, and that just blew my head open.
Hmm.
And I went into our first meeting and I said, man, I just discovered this amazing shit. And he was like, oh yeah, that wheel music. Yeah, we're not going to do that. I was like, okay, same experiences with my piano teacher. And so I was like, man, that sucks. Okay. So what I decided to do, and then my first lesson, he gave me it's a really great practice. Make a 4-bar phrase, and then make another 4-bar phrase, and come back tomorrow. And I knew it was the 20th century, so I knew that much. But there was like, at some point I had a certain chord, and he's like, oh, minor 7th chord. Yeah, kind of like, we don't do that. We don't do that here. Even though the music was fairly abstract, because at some point there was a minor 7th chord. And maybe, in hindsight, if we both listen to it now, I'm like, yeah, maybe that's not the right chord there. But it didn't matter that it was that minor 7th chord. Yeah, that's kind of, we don't do that. So I was like, oh shit. Okay. So what I decided to do was like, okay, if I'm going to learn from these characters, I'm going to make a list of all the shit that they're telling me that I'm not supposed to do, so I keep track of it. And so I made a little list of like, okay, we don't do like because it's just this whole stylistic thing. It's a mix of like personal bias and also like this academic hierarchy thing of like, I'm above you, and so I know that you're not supposed to do this kind of thing. Some of it was that, but also like one of my teachers really didn't like, very specifically, when you had a bunch of 16th notes and then you had a couple of triplets. He hated that. So I made a note like, okay, for him, I don't do that. Okay, but I'm going to keep track. I'm going to keep track of that. So it was this kind of weird. It was this kind of weird learning I mean, I feel like I would have done so much better studying with Nadia Boulanger and just being told to just write like Bach or something, you know, like okay, I know it's a game. Let's just really play a rigorous game. This was this game of like trying to manage their personalities, and it was weird. It was weird.
You make me say something offensive again.
Oh, go for it.
But since I like most of the story that you're telling me is I also experienced similar things, and pretty early on I think I understood, actually because of having met Robert Fripp, really, that the people who work as teachers are sort of failed musicians.
Mm.
And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think it's understandable. It happens, right? Like, and so you have a certain level of frustration. And so that means that it becomes even like more important that you kind of like identify with a specific style or group or whatever in order to keep sane, to keep your sanity. Like you kind of like you embrace something.
But it's
Uh,
safe. That's safe.
yes, exactly, and that's like one of my teachers I played him something. He said, "Oh, the drummer doesn't groove," or stuff like shit like that, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
stupid things, and yeah. But I pretty early on I understood it's just a personal statement. It's not something that I should take as uh, you know like generally accepted uh,
Right. Right. Right.
opinion, right? Right.
Right. Right. Right. Yeah,
Yeah,
for me,
it's
it was I guess the hardest thing for me was if we're playing a game, just tell me what the rules are and then I can play the game. Whereas I felt like I was having to figure out the rules of the game while I was playing the game.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
I don't know what it would have been like to actually be able to explore musical elements that were really interesting to me and have support for that. And um, I don't even, I have no idea what that would have been like. But
I was lucky to have a couple or even three great teachers in my life.
mm,
I think it just makes all the difference,
mm.
right?
It's interesting too. I was, when you first were saying that you had a similar thing, it occurred to me. I wonder if it would even have been worse having been in Europe, but I bet it actually would have been better because in America, we're trying to pretend that we're connected to this old European school. And
Mhm.
it's kind of ridiculous, you know. Whereas you might have actually been more in touch with the, and you can explain to me, but there's a chance that you actually would have been more connected to the living part, whereas I was more connected to the dead part. You know what I mean?
Yeah, in a way that's true because in my childhood there were only like three TV programs. Well, not programs, channels, right? And so it was the first channel, second channel, and the third channel was a local channel. And so the state in Germany that I grew up in was the state where Cologne is, Köln, which had the studio for electronic music with Stockhausen and stuff. So
Mhm.
that's why, like
Oh, was
sometimes
that where he was?
yeah. So
Oh,
and that's why I was like sometimes like maybe when I was able to stay up like at 9 at night or something, right? Like I was hearing some contemporary classical electronic music, right,
wow.
and so that was sort of like present, so that was sort of like a normal thing for me,
Right.
and that's why being in music school where there were like these then and I'm being offensive again, but a little bit like these wannabe musicians that, and I'm really in a way, if I look, I'm really hurt by some of the things they said, right?
Mm,
Not anymore, but thinking back it was really hurtful, and but I always had this foundation of knowing what is out there, and
mm,
that there's a much wider fields to explore. And like I said, I had a couple of great teachers who encouraged me to write. I was in a guitar orchestra, acoustic guitar orchestra, and I was encouraged to write for that orchestra. So I wrote a piece with like 12 parts and stuff like that, and this was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, we survived. I guess we could.
No, I mean, I have to say, couldn't have been better. Like I have like an amazing amount of experience and knowledge, and it's all the the result of the also of the shit I went through,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
I guess, like, I mean, what, like, I find it fascinating that you actually decided that you wanted that you were actually going to play the game. Like, I wouldn't have been able to do that.
Well,
I would have
I felt, yeah, I felt like, yeah, I mean, sometimes I wonder, like, what would have happened if I had just left and moved to LA and got and joined a rock band. I probably would be, I probably would have been a lot more successful earlier on, probably. But I felt like there was just information and experience in there that I didn't want to shut myself off to, and I, I would have to. Um, I was going to have to work extra hard to figure out what it was, and it wasn't just the classical world, but like world music was just starting to explode too, and that was really interesting to me, and I just felt like, um, to get access to the stuff, you needed to play some games because it wasn't set up, that wasn't set up to just give you what you wanted. In fact, several of my professors were even, I can remember now, saying to me on several occasions, like, what are you doing here?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I felt like also if I got far enough along, I just wanted to get the degree because it would
But
feel
what
like,
did do you know what they meant?
not entirely, but I think, the thing about the school where I went, at the University of Oregon, has its biggest department in the music school is music education.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why that is because, or was, I don't know if it's the case anymore, was that, um, Oregon was a very forward and is a very forward thinking state in that, uh, they mandated as a state that every school had a music education program.
Mm-hmm.
So high school, middle school, elementary school, music was part of their program, and end of story. We believe this is important. So they needed a lot of music teachers. And that was the main thing there. And I think probably, they were saying like, you're not really one of us. Like, you're not going to
Mm-hmm.
go out to Eastern Oregon and teach choir.
Mm-hmm.
What the fuck are you doing here?
Mm-hmm. I see. Yeah, yeah,
uh,
yeah.
uh, you know, so it was kind of like, that was the core of the program. And then they kind of gave a nod to everything else, and I think to my advantage, um, the composition program only had like 11 students.
Mm-hmm.
So there wasn't there was a lot of freedom in the curriculum to just kind of do what you wanted to explore, where as long as you got the core stuff. Uh,
So
yeah.
despite the beginning of the relationship with that composition teacher, um, how do you think it was kind of like good for you overall?
Yeah, it was good. It was good for me because, you were forced to write. So I mean, you can't go wrong if you're just writing a bunch of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got to my senior recital, there's some pretty okay stuff in there, and I was forced to do a lot of stuff, and I wasn't forced, but, I was challenged, and there was a lot of freedom once I kind of figured out, like, um, the game of it didn't have to be like, we didn't write 12 tone. It didn't have to be completely atonal, but it had to be, there was kind of a style that was acceptable, and you could kind of veer melodically as long as it was dissonant enough. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And I do remember very specifically, there was a certain period of like a couple of months where I got so comfortable using kind of all the pitches, like not being bound
Mhm.
into a certain kind of tonality or something, using all the pitches that I couldn't even hear like why this one or that one, you know, like I'm going up to this note. I can use any of the notes in there to get up there. And I couldn't even, there was even a point like I couldn't really even decide like which one was the good one, you know, and I really couldn't figure out like, should it be a B or B flat? I really have no idea. I can't even hear the difference between them. So, you know, the exposure and just really just being, like you're saying, being exposed to so many different sounds and sound combinations is great, you know. And then, of course, doing, you know, you wouldn't even do it now, but I had to do all the scores by hand and all the parts by hand, which took
Yeah.
months. Took
Which
months.
I never did. I
Yeah,
like my first composition was already using Notator, you know, on
yeah.
Atari ST or
It was
something.
so it was so close. Actually, it was so close. Um, I kept going down to the computer lab to see if they had done you know, notation yet, but no, I had to do it all by hand. And look, here's my scherzo. Look at that handwriting. Oh, I can't do that now.
It's beautiful.
I know.
Yeah. Hey, so are you aware of the lineage of the composition teacher?
Um, there were three guys. There was Monty Tubb, and I don't know him, but I remember having a meeting with him. I didn't quite get on with him that well. He was an interesting guy, but I didn't quite resonate with him as much. But I do remember the day I came in for a lesson, and he had just found um, a piece by Astor Piazzolla. He didn't know Piazzolla, and he
Mhm.
was like, "This is really interesting." And he was almost kind of when I think about it, uh, I think he was moved by the music
Mhm.
and also impressed that it was sophisticated and modern, because that kind of music shouldn't be. And
Mhm.
he was kind of expressing that he was sharing that. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. Of
Mhm.
course, now, like, yeah, Piazzolla is a fucking monster, but he was the kind of music that shouldn't have been accepted there.
Mhm.
Uh, the second guy, Hal Owen, Hal's not around anymore, but Hal was great. He was kind of my favorite teacher. Little guy, couldn't his glasses were so thick. Like when he'd make us like we had a little class as well, and he'd have us write fugues, and you know he'd put your piece on the piano, or he'd like
Mhm.
like this, and his ear was so good he didn't need to play anything on the piano. You know, he was great.
Mhm.
And then the last guy I was going to study with, Derek Healy, I think his name, British, super resentful of obviously grew up in the British system, and now had a little office in the basement here, and didn't didn't like being there. It was Composition wasn't taken seriously. It was just a job. And he actually talked me into, or we discussed, uh, I brought in some pieces and some ideas, and he was like, "You should study orchestration." I was like, "Great, let's just do that." So he had me go through this really cool orchestration book that was a really great way to learn, which was you'd be given I know this is super technical, but it was cool. You'd be given a piano reduction of a phrase, like a line or two, and then it would say WC and
Hmm.
the and the instruments,
Hmm.
and then you would orchestrate it, and then you'd show up and he'd pull out the real score, and then you'd look at it, and that's all we did for the whole year.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah,
It's
it
great.
was really great. I loved.
Yeah.
Actually, that I really loved because um, it wasn't composition, so nobody was judging you, but you were. It was really skillful and technical, and you never got what they did. Like it never matched up,
Hmm.
And then you would talk about he was so knowledgeable. That was really cool. Like why would the oboe be up here instead of the flute, and how what the effect of that was. And I never got that great at it, but it was cool to be exposed to that. And I have like uber respect for these orchestrator guys.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
And you got your degree.
I got my degree. Yeah, and actually what happened was it actually took 5 years to get all the credits, but I did my recital in the fourth year, and so I was pretty much done, but I had to make up like extra college stuff and then a couple of music classes. And that's the in that year was actually where I met Robert and went to the first guitar craft course. So I felt really fortunate that I had kind of, even though I was still in school, I had done the senior recital and I'd finished the bulk of the work. And then, because I don't know what I don't know how I would have finished the senior recital if I had already bumped into guitar craft. It probably would have just wiped that. It would have been really hard to go to keep that thread going.
So while you were in Oregon, did you have a rock band?
Yes, Punishment Farm.
Hmm.
Punishment Farm, and we were even more like seriously punky, and um, yeah, yeah.
Did you meet those guys there at school or?
I did. Funny enough, I moved into the dorms, and I was out of my world. I had driven my tiny little car from Texas like 4 days up to Oregon. I didn't know a single person.
Mm.
And I pulled into the dorms, and everybody was all pretty. I mean, first of all, everyone's not only are there more. I mean, in South Texas, I grew up around. Obviously, I'm white, but there's lots of Mexican and Spanish and Hispanic culture. Get up to Oregon, there's pretty much only white people, and they're
Mm.
seriously white.
Mm.
And so I'm in the dorms, and it's like, man, everybody looks the same, and everything's like, oh, it's pretty squeaky clean here. And I'm sitting in my dorm room the second day, and somebody moves in next door, and I hear um, Devo and Iggy Pop, and I was like, I just went over and knocked on the door. And I remember my friend Bill there. He said, we were just sitting here listening to music, and suddenly there's this big Texan guy going, was that Iggy Pop? And so Bill ended up being our singer in Punishment Farm. And then I met some guys there. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And still in touch with a lot of them. And that was a great scene. I mean, and on the West Coast in the 80s, there was just this Black Flag, Circle Jerks, X, the whole
Mhm.
like West Coast LA punk rock scene. They were just all going up and down the coast all the time, and so we saw all these bands. And the thing about that music, it's just it's attitude. It's attitude first, and then the
Mhm.
notes. And
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and energy. So that was it was cool, and it's the opposite of technical and then the music will come kind of a thing. It's the totally, we're starting we're starting with the attitude, and then let's find, let's just grab a note and turn it up.
Yeah. So and really the live music versus recorded music is also like especially in the 80s. I think was there was a big divide, right? Like the recordings in the 80s didn't really sound that great, I would
Yeah,
say, in
there was,
general.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But then like, getting to see like one of those bands live is like something completely different.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. It's pretty
yeah,
tame. It's actually pretty tame when you listen to some of the recordings
yeah,
of shows that I saw. It's like, oh, they're just kind of, the Sex Pistols, their music is really slow when you
mhm,
listen to it on record. It's like,
mhm.
holy shit, it's so, it's very slow, and it's pretty, except for the singer, it's pretty tamish. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so Discipline, right, was
Same
an
time.
important same
Yeah,
time, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Pretty
did
much
you
right then, right then.
right then? So that was so the year it was released, or
I moved to Oregon, with that record. It just come out.
okay, okay,
Um,
okay,
I don't know, was it 80 or 81?
81.
Yeah, 81's when I moved there. So yeah, so that's where, I mean, I landed in Oregon with, uh, I mean, for me, well, there's a few records, but that one, Talking Heads, Remain in Light,
Mm,
a little earlier, and then Mahavishnu, Visions of the Emerald Beyond. That and Discipline for me were the Muso records. Yeah.
mhm.
Yeah. And funny enough, the punk rock scene hated that shit, and the jazz musicians hated Discipline.
Yes.
Hated it. They hated it. They hated. I think they just hated the feel of the 16th notes right from the beginning. At least what I thought,
What
what I heard.
what is it about the 16th notes? Is it any
Well,
idea in
there's no
hindsight?
well, there's no swing at all. There's no swing. It's
Mm.
it's it's Machine Gun as opposed to I don't know. I don't know.
That's well, like I never understood. Like it's just like two completely different things. I mean, why? um, yeah. So interesting. So that phase of your life really was like a big um, clash of the worlds, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. None,
And
none of the worlds exactly met at all. There
mhm,
was and world music. I was interested in Indian music and not quite African yet, but all those worlds. In other parts of the world, and I think they did maybe start meshing, but it was pretty much. I feel like that time period in the world, pretty probably much the 80s, was where all this stuff started to come together and start to
mhm,
accept each other,
mhm,
and it's really just it's really just being willing to experience something out of your experience on its own terms. That's all it is,
yeah,
without trying to bring your thing to it. Just like, what's let its thing come to me. And thankfully I think we're in a different world now.
yeah. It's still a mystery to me why it's so important to bring your own thing to things. Like
Yeah.
that was I never thought that way. It's really I find it interesting. Like, but maybe yeah, that's very much related to what we were saying about music teachers as well, right?
Well,
Classical
and
music.
I feel like and I don't know what's cultural from where I grew up, or just what's in our culture, or what's natural in an unevolved human being, but the idea that it's somehow mature to be able to judge something and be able
Hmm.
to say that's bad and that's good.
Hmm.
That somehow was like a virtue that of becoming mature and growing up. That's
Hmm.
how I saw it as a kid, and then
Hmm.
with the smarter people, this was somehow a maturity of discernment that that's shit and this is gold, and that whole
Hmm.
thing is complete bullshit.
Hmm.
Everything's gold, basically. If you come to it from its terms, everything has its own. value, and music's just music. There's not better or worse,
No,
really.
no, no. So the next step, or as you said, there was a little bit of overlap um, with your first guitarcraft experience there, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, and do you remember how you found out about the course?
I don't know if I've told you this story. Maybe I've told you. I don't know. But the thing that I was getting frustrated with uh, the whole thing of studying music, like how you get good at it, is this patchwork of influences that you're trying to put yourself under. And I thought, man, if this was 300 years ago, you would just go to you'd you'd find who was the best at it and go to them. And I was like, man,
Mhm.
I should do that. Did I ever tell you this?
I think you
I
did,
I,
yes, yes,
I
but
should I should do that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make a list of all the musicians I think that are great, and I'm gonna contact them, or I'm gonna figure out like who. You know what? Fuck it. I'm gonna pretend it's 300 years ago. I mean, that is not the way the world worked then. Now it kind of does, but at the time, everyone's inaccessible, and there's
mhm,
all this mystery, and you don't, you
mhm,
know.
mhm,
So I made a list of like 30 musicians that I thought were great, from Peter Gabriel to David Bowie to McLaughlin um, to Fripp to everybody. And when I went down the list, I was like, Robert seemed like the only one that you could actually learn something from. Like, yeah, I could go to David Bowie and like throw myself at him and or Peter Gabriel, but I didn't feel like they would be able to really tell me anything. I'm
mhm,
sure you could osmosis something from them, but
mhm,
Robert always seemed like somebody, he could tell you something.
mhm.
And I made that list. And then, like 4 weeks later, I saw the ad in Downbeat that he was teaching. And I was like, okay, well, I don't even need to think about this. I'm just going. And yeah,
Was that like one of the very first courses?
it was the third course.
Third. Hmm.
So it was I think he did like six in a row, like either, 6 weeks or over 8 weeks. So it was just a couple of weeks into the very beginning of it.
Okay. And it
Yeah.
was 1 week course or 5 days, something like that.
5.5, 5 and 4/7 days or something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was the very beginning of guitarcraft where Robert was still kind of like trying to find, you
Yeah.
know, it
Yeah.
was largely improvised, I guess, then in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I,
Mhm.
I mean, I heard I got the impression that even on the first two courses, he was trying stuff that he just immediately abandoned.
Yeah. Hmm.
And so even I probably it was maybe even a little more, I don't know if it was more organized or not, who knows, but it definitely seemed like it was uh, on the cutting edge of the needle. you know yeah, yeah, I mean, I didn't know that. It did feel like it at the time, because I mean, we knew that we were all using this new tuning, and he didn't even know it.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I also spoke with Tony Jabal,
Oh,
and
great.
and he was kind of like talking about the same time period, and then was really funny with Tony somehow for me, like that he had been in Turkey and like learned about all these intricacies and like all these details, and then coming into guitarcraft, like especially the early years where things were like so reduced to just okay, just play the D string, like downstrokes for 3 hours, right? Like that
Right.
kind of thing. And I found that to be like really fascinating. And but as you know, I know about the power of that work. It's I think it's extremely, it's wonderful, and it's kind of it's different really. really very different approach to music that can't really be put into the worlds of rock or pop or classical, or it's something more universal. It's just about
Yeah.
that one unmodulated note, right?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's pretty hard to explain it. Although, you know, the I do feel like I feel like if I were to really philosophize about it, I feel like we're moving into a kind of I think of it as like the age of the craftsman. Like
Mm-hmm.
we're witnessing this in our
Mm-hmm.
life.
Mm-hmm.
That probably wasn't. Maybe it just started when we were born, but it's like a big thing, and so I think it's going to make a lot more sense to people in 100 years.
Yeah.
This pure craftsmanship, and that's what guitar craft was. And of course, I see it all over the place now, aspects of this. But yeah, this idea of just playing one note and doing it well and doing it slow and doing it well
Mm-hmm.
is, I mean, it's the opposite of attacking a piece of Bach like when I was a kid.
Yes. Yes.
Although I'm going to be sending you, Marcus, this Isaac Stern masterclass I've been watching online.
Mm-hmm.
Holy shit, it's really awesome.
Okay.
And it's a cool bridge between this. And of course he's older now, so he's in the new world,
Mm.
but he came from the old world, and fascinating. Fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I guess let's stop here, right? This is sort of
Yeah.
like um but any, maybe like one last thought here. So guitarcraft really spoke to you in a way, right? It really, or was
Yeah.
that from the very beginning, or was that something that took you a while to absorb after that first course, or
Well,
was it immediate?
it definitely took a while to, no, it was absolute immediacy, absolute
Okay.
immediacy. You know, and the thing that was so shocking, which doesn't seem so shocking now, but at the time, everything that I had kind of studied or learned about music up to that point and super exemplified when I was at university was the composer is the creator of the music. The
Mm-hmm.
composer thinks up the music. And which is such a weird thing because we're studying music and really nobody's a composer except for like 11 of us out of this whole school of 500.
Mm-hmm.
And with guitarcraft, it was very clear the, the composer is not the creator of the music. It's like there's a totally different, like there's an active dynamic with this unknown thing. And that was really, uh, you know, that was a brainwash, and I had to come back and kind of recover from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course, you know, that's a Western, that's, I grew up in the Western, essentially academic tradition. You wouldn't think that if you grew up in West Africa or in India.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, now we have all those worlds mixed together. So yeah, so it was pretty immediate. I mean, the first note that we played in the group, you know, Robert had us. I don't even know what happens now, but I think you weren't supposed to touch your instrument for 2 weeks before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So your first note in the new tuning after 2 weeks in this context was like, whoa, the sound in the room and the feeling is like, whoa, that's a note. I could go home now.
Okay. Great, Trey. Let's continue next week, right?
Sounds good. Uh, awesome.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Great stories, and I'm looking forward to more.
Yeah. All right, dude. Have
Okay,
a good
bye
day.
for now. Yeah, you too.
All right.
Talk soon.
Cheers.
Bye. Cheers.